Airports are, in a word, humbling. Doesn't matter who you are, CEO, celebrity, or world leader, you still take off your shoes at security, still get patted down if the scanner beeps. And if you're not wearing a name tag with a little flashing light that says, "Hey, I run a country," chances are someone might just assume you're a regular person. That's exactly what happened the day Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the sitting president of Burkina Faso, walked into the airport without fanfare and got treated like any other traveler. And here's the kicker. He didn't mind. Let's rewind. This wasn't long after Traoré had risen to power. A 30-something military captain who had taken the reins of a nation through a dramatic political transition. Young, sharp, and fiercely focused on anti-corruption and self-reliance, he was becoming a new kind of African leader. Less about photo ops, more about purpose. But what made this moment so unforgettable wasn't politics or speeches. It was what happened when he boarded a commercial flight, just like any regular citizen. Not a private jet. Not a presidential suite in the sky. He walked through the terminal like anyone else, in a simple, pressed shirt and pants, no visible entourage, no VIP airs. He stood in line. He passed through security. He even held his own boarding pass. Imagine that. And that's where it all began. As he stepped onto the plane and took his seat, a young flight attendant began doing routine checks. Clipboard in hand. Friendly, efficient, but clearly not briefed on the man now seated quietly in row 10. She paused. There was a slight furrow in her brow. That silent calculation that service professionals do when something doesn't quite click. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "Are you sure this is your seat?" He looked up, calm and relaxed. "Yes," he replied simply, handing her his boarding pass. She looked at the ticket, then at him, then back at the ticket, still unsure. "I'm sorry," she continued, "but this section is reserved for priority passengers. You may need to move further back." Still no sign of annoyance. No flash of ego. No, "do you know who I am?" moment. Just a smile. One of those quiet smiles that says, "I've seen much worse, and this isn't worth raising my voice over." Before the situation could escalate further, a nearby aide who had been watching and likely suppressing laughter leaned forward and whispered to the flight attendant. Her eyes widened. She looked again, and then again. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a man with a nice smile and a quiet voice. This was the president of Burkina Faso. A wave of panic rippled across her face. She immediately began to apologize, stammering through the words, "Mr. President, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." And again he smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "I'm better than this," but the kind that says, "It's okay. You were just doing your job." He waved it off. "No need to apologize," he said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." Now imagine this scene playing out in real time. A head of state, someone who controls armies, makes national policy, and headlines global summits, is sitting calmly in an economy seat, while the woman who just asked him to move is now visibly shaken, apologizing profusely. But what he did next is what made this story iconic. He didn't demand to be moved to first class. He didn't call for her supervisor. He didn't even ask for special treatment. He just stayed where he was. And here's the beautiful irony. That restraint, that humility, became the very thing that made the story explode. As the plane ascended into the skies, social media began to buzz. Someone posted about the encounter, then someone else. Soon, the narrative spread across African Twitter and beyond, not because it was scandalous, but because it was refreshing. In an age of selfies, private jets, and over-the-top leadership displays. Here was a president who chose to be ordinary. A man of the people who didn't just claim to be, he lived it, seat 10C and all. And the symbolism? It runs deep. Because Burkina Faso, and West Africa more broadly, has seen its share of flashy rulers, distant bureaucrats, and power-hungry elites. But Traoré? He represented something else entirely. A leadership style rooted in dignity, not dominance. In humility, not hierarchy. Let's not forget, this isn't a leader who came from a long line of political elites. He rose up through the military, served, led. And when his nation called for change, he stepped into the storm, not to posture, but to serve. And this airport moment? It was more than just a funny mix-up. It was a living metaphor for who he is. A man who can command rooms, but doesn't need to. A man who could demand loyalty, but instead earns respect. A man who didn't correct someone for not knowing his name, because he knows exactly who he is. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Think about what it must feel like to lead a country where your face is on TV, your name is on newspapers, and yet you still walk through airports like any other person. It's rare, almost unheard of. And yet, it sends a powerful message to the world, and especially to his people. Leadership is not about being above others. It's about being among them. So, next time someone talks about power, remind them of this story. Because sometimes, true power isn't loud. It doesn't show up in armored convoys or scream into microphones. Sometimes, true power sits quietly in an airplane seat, hands folded, smiling, while the world scrambles to figure out who just walked past them. And that's the kind of power that doesn't need to introduce itself. Because it speaks for itself, even when no one recognizes it.